The Birds is a novelette by British writer Daphne du Maurier, first published in her 1952 collection The Apple Tree. It is the story of a farmhand, his family, and his community that are attacked by flocks of birds and seabirds in kamikaze missions. The story is set in du Maurier's native Cornwall shortly after the end of the Second World War. By the end of the story it has become clear that all of Britain is under aerial assault. The story was the inspiration for Alfred Hitchcock's film The Birds, released in 1963, the same year that The Apple Tree was reprinted as The Birds and Other Stories. In 2009, Irish playwright Conor McPherson adapted the story for the stage at Dublin's Gate Theatre. Background: the author saw a man ploughing a field while seagulls were wheeling and diving above him and composed a story of these birds growing hostile and attacking, inspired by her quiet, rural hometown in Cornwall. The story is thought to be a metaphor for the attacks on London during World War II, or the Blitz in particular. Radio and TV dramatizations. The story has been dramatized for radio and TV on several occasions, including episode 838 of Lux Radio Theatre on the 20th of July 1953 with Herbert Marshall, episode 217 of Escape on the 10th of July 1954 with Ben Wright and Virginia Gregg, episode 240 of CBS TV series Danger on the 31st of May 1955 with Michael Strong and Betty Lou Holland, BBC Afternoon Theatre on the 20th of November 1974 with Howard Gurney, Chris Harris, and Elizabeth Boxer, a three-part BBC Radio 4 extra adaptation, read by Charlie Barncutt, first broadcast the 23rd of April 2008, an adaptation by Melissa Murray, for BBC Radio 4 as The Friday Player, first broadcast on the 30th of April 2010. Plot summary: in a small Cornish seaside town in early December, there is a sudden cold snap. A wounded war veteran on military pension, Nat Hocken, is working part-time for a farm owner when he notices a large number of birds behaving strangely along the peninsula where his family lives. He attributes this to the sudden arrival of winter. At night, he hears a tapping on his bedroom window and encounters a bird that pecks his hand, causing him to bleed. As the night progresses, he encounters more birds, especially those flocking into his children's room, but the birds leave at dawn. Nat reassures his wife that they were restless because of a sudden change in the weather. The next day, Nat tells his fellow workers about the night's events, but they give his story no importance. As Nat later walks to the beach to dispose of dead birds, he notices what appear to be whitecaps on the sea, but it is actually a great line of seagulls waiting for the tide to rise. When Nat arrives home, he and his family hear over the radio that birds are attacking all over Britain, presumably because of the unnatural weather. Nat decides to board up the windows and chimneys of his house. He notices more birds, including the gulls, above the sea waiting for the tide. Nat rushes to pick up his daughter, Jill, from the school bus stop to keep her safe. On his way back, Nat spots his boss, Mr. Trigg, who has a car, and persuades him to give Jill a lift home. Mr. Trigg cheerfully professes to be unfazed by the announcements and plans on shooting at the birds for fun. He invites Nat to come along, but Nat rejects Mr. Trigg's offer and continues home, believing that hunting them would be futile. Just before he reaches home, the gulls descend, attacking him with their beaks. Luckily, Nat manages to reach the cottage door with only minor injuries. Soon, massive flocks of birds attack. A national emergency is declared on BBC Radio, and people are told not to leave their homes. Then, due to the unprecedented nature of the emergency, The BBC announces that it is going silent for the night and will resume broadcasting the next morning. For safety, Nat brings the family into the kitchen for the night. During the dinner they hear what sounds like gunfire from airplanes overhead, followed by the sound of the planes crashing. The attacks die down, and Nat calculates that the birds will only attack at high tide. The next morning, wireless broadcasts do not resume and the radio is silent. The tide recedes, and Nat sets out to obtain supplies from his neighbors. He finds piles of dead birds around the houses. Those still alive peer at him from afar. Nat walks to the farm where he is employed, only to find Mr. Trigg, Mrs. Trigg and the workman, Jim, dead. Later he finds the postman's body by the road. Soon he comes to the realization that his neighbors have all been killed by the birds. Nat returns home with the supplies, but soon the birds attack once again. As if facing a firing squad, Nat smokes his last cigarette, then throws the empty pack into the fire and watches it burn.